From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwrights Center's Theater Begins Here.
Today, theater begins with magic, but first, a membership highlight. Did you know that you can always submit questions to our podcast before we record? Click the link in our bio that says submit a question to the podcast to see what topics we'll be talking about in future episodes and contribute to the conversation. We love learning what's on your mind and the questions you have about theater and where it begins. And now, on to the show. Gina Femia's work has been seen and developed at the Goodman Theater, MCC Theater, Playwrights Horizons, EST, Page 73, New Georgia's, CTG, Theater of Note, and Pandora Productions, among others. Selected honors include the Kilroy's List, Leah Ryan Prize, Doric Wilson Award, the Otis Guernsey New Voices Award, and the Newcomb Award in Playwriting. Nominations for Drama League and NYIT. Gina is a former core writer with the Playwrights Center and an alum of EST Youngblood, Pages 73's Interstate 73, Pipeline Theater's Play Lab, New Georgia's Audrey Residency, the Ingram New Play Lab at Nashville Rep, and Parsnip Ship's Radio Roots Writers Group. Gina's a New Georgia's affiliated artist and has received residencies with Page 73, Powerhouse, NTI at the O'Neill, Space on Ryder Farm, and Fresh Ground Pepper. Gina's debut YA novel, Alondra, came out this year. Welcome, Gina.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, to start us off, we like to toss you a softball question, even though I feel like it's very big, is how did you get into theater?
Yeah, I love that question. So I grew up in Brooklyn in Bay Ridge, and it's, a place that's close enough to the city that the city, you can get there by train, but it's also far enough to feel like a world away, to feel like a trip. So, but my parents were really big musical fans. They also grew up in Brooklyn. They actually grew up like 5 blocks away from each other and fell in love and got married. And they're celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary this year, which
Congrats.
is wild. But they were a huge fan of musicals. And so me and my sister became huge fans of musicals as well, I think. And so every once in a while, they would take us out into the city to Broadway to see a musical. And one of my first musicals is either Cats or Beauty and the Beast. We don't know which one it was. But I just fell in love with that. And my mom had records of Broadway shows. So like when I was 9 years old, I was listening to Chorus Line and not understanding half of it. But, as I got older, I would like re-listen to it. Another part would make sense. But I just fell in love with theater from like that point of view, from musicals. I thought that it was the best thing ever, like for people to just like burst into song to express themselves was really cool. And I was always a writer. I was always writing something. And when I was 16, my dad signed me up for a free playwriting class. There was a organization called Young Playwrights Inc. that used to be able to go out and do free workshops in libraries, in New York public libraries. But when he signed me up, I was like, well, I can't do this because I don't know how to write music. So how could I possibly write a play? Because for me, all plays were musicals. So I was like, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. But I quickly learned that words could become music, or like words were my type of music or creating theater. And that's basically what I just did. I've done since I was 16, so 2 decades of just theater stuff, doing theater, writing theater.
That's incredible. Like what a cool thing for your dad to see you so clearly at that age and give you the tools you needed to thrive as a young artist. That's gorgeous. Was there a moment where you felt like, oh, I'm a playwright. This is what I do. I'm going to keep doing this? Or was it just of course I'm a playwright. I've been writing since I was 16. This is just who I am.
Yeah, I think that there was definitely a moment where I realized what being a playwright actually meant for me, or like how I stepped into it, because I wrote plays with young playwrights. I wrote my first full-length play at 16 called Confessions of a Catholic Schoolgirl, which
Nice.
is so, I even remember like having like a stage direction where the main character was like walking in place on like a turntable thing, because in again like my viewing of plays, like every play had like a turntable on it,
Right.
and I had the teacher be like, not every theater can do that. And I was like, not according to my experience, but that's fake. um so that was my first play, and I it was coming up towards the time of like applying for college, and in my family nobody had gone to college, and so it was a very big like in me and my sister, like from birth, like you're going to college. And I had always wanted to be a teacher, so I was going to apply. I applied to a bunch of schools for that, and my dad, again, who is very much a dreamer, he's very much the just like was always just like, no, you should follow your dreams and do your art. So I applied to a dramatic writing program at SUNY Purchase and got into that one, to my shock, because I didn't know that the work was that compelling. And my dad said, like, you have your whole life to be a teacher, but like, just this is an opportunity you can't miss. My mom was a little more skeptical at first. I remember at orientation, she like raised her hand and she was like, yes, but how do they make money? Which is a very valid question, especially, again, both my parents very working class, and they were like, you're going to college to like to make money. And I was, you know, surprise. So I got into this program, and I think now, looking back 20 years, I can really say, like, I don't think I was like, I'm going to be the next great American playwright. I think I was like, I'm going to college to like learn a thing. I guess and I kept waiting to be like, when am I a playwright? When am I a playwright? And I think the first time I felt that way was when I wrote a play called The Old Man in the Woods, and I like in undergrad, and I took it with me. I wound up going to grad school right after. So in those 4 years, I was always like, when am I going to be a playwright? I don't know. In grad school, I like rewrote that play, and it became a whole other play. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could do that. That's really cool. I was just like completely changed. And I took another play from undergrad and I completely rewrote it. And I was like, this is so cool. I didn't know that plays were underneath plays. Wow. And I think that's when I was like, that now I'm a playwright, because I feel like it just happens so naturally, but it always goes back to The Old Man in the Woods for me. And it's a play that I no longer work on because I've outgrown it as a writer, but I can see like that's the thing that gave me like the push to be like, no, this is it. This I am this thing, and I decided to like really just go full force and figure out what that meant in the greater playwriting world.
I love that. That's incredible.
Yeah. Every time I think about like when you revisit a play and you're like, oh God, I was giving birth to two plays. They're two separate things. But I also, since I'm in the horror genre, like to think of you're exercising a play out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's always like a really good moment where you're like, I have two things here. How do I grapple with this? How do I separate you two? Yeah. So today's episode is about magic and all of the ways that we can think about magic in theater.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back to the first time that first moment that you experienced theatrical magic?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be with musicals once again. I feel like there's a lot more I mean, the idea of a musical in and of itself is magical, because we don't go around singing fully orchestrated songs, unfortunately. It's a real downside of life. Um, but I think, seeing Cats and seeing how just like the set of that with the large dumpster, driven set, and how like things became other things in order to like tell a story, like that, I feel like is just like natural. Like that is magic. I'm like watching magic happen, because you're taking something that's like a ladder and you're turning it into like a train for Skimbleshanks, the railway cat. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that is where musicals are, where I like learned about this idea of magic. And then it was just exacerbated by like discovering Shakespeare in my older teenage years, because Shakespeare is like the master of magic in a lot of his work, particularly A Midsummer Night's Dream. I did that we did that production in my senior year of high school of Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was just, my favorite part of it was the magic, and just knowing like, well, Shakespeare is Shakespeare, and by then it'd been very like, like this is the best playwright ever. You should aspire to be him, and also no, you'll never be him. um, and also, if you have an opinion that differs from that, you're wrong. Like it's already like I'm 18 and like this is like hammered into me. But when I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait, but like there are fairies in this play. Like somebody's head gets transformed into a donkey's. Like, how is that not the pinnacle of magic? And you're saying he's the most serious, like best, et cetera, et cetera. And he, like, magic is at the core of this particular piece. And then my freshman year of college at undergrad, I saw The Winter's Tale, which I'd never like come across at all. And I was like, wait, this is like even better magic, like there's a statue that came to life, spoilers, but like hello, like I was just like, this is so good. Anything can happen on stage, like Shakespeare said so. And it was interesting. It's been interesting because then, I was like, well, okay, I'm rooted in Shakespeare and magic. But then I found when I started to try to put magic into my work, it was actually, I was told that it was like not being taken, you can't do that. It's not a serious thing. Like magic it's very loaded term, I found, which I thought was interesting and in direct conflict with what I have had already like seen re Shakespeare.
What do you think makes the theater such an ideal space for magic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because I think about this idea of magic all the time, and I think it's such an interesting word because it's one of those words where we all have an individual definition of what that means, and sometimes it overlaps and sometimes it doesn't. So it's like, well, what is magic? Is it watching fairies, which are a magical creature, do a fairy thing on stage? Or is it like having something transform into something else? Or is it the fact that we're all sitting in a space, bringing illusions together in order to create something meaningful for us all to like experience? So it's like the very act of making theater is a type of magic to me. It's practical magic because of course there's an answer to all of the things, but it's also when you're writing it, it's like, where are the moments where there's no simple answers? Like, how does she turn from a statue into a human? There's no answer given, but it doesn't matter because it was magic. And I think that could feel like a cop out to people who don't have a definition, like that don't want to believe in something like that. But it's also like magic to watch like an actor be a statue and then start to move, right? Like that's a magical moment. It's moving. It's it's just like we're sucked in, and it's partly because of the performances and partly because of the words that and the situation that we're told is happening. Um, but yeah, so it's one of those. It's just a big, beautiful thing, and something that I think we can get lost in a good way if we let ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think about the magic of theater, like even a movie theater, honestly, any type of performance, is when the lights go down.
Mm-hmm.
Like the second
Yeah.
the lights go down, everyone knows to be quiet.
Yeah.
Everyone, like, we're just sitting in the dark, even if for like a split second together, and either music starts or a light cue happens. And to me, I really love stage managers and listening to them
Yes.
give calls. So I'm like,
Yeah.
that the first call is always magical to me. It's like anytime I was
Yeah.
in ASM, I was like, yes, you've given the first call. You have started the magic, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I, talking about magic and thinking about that, it makes me go back to musical theater, where the tricky part about that is always trying to figure out where you put the song in. Like, how
Yeah.
do you set up the song? Where does it fit in? And
Mm-hmm.
I think the same can kind of be true about magic if,
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of pieces where there's a magical creature, they're going to do magical things. But what leads you into incorporating magic? Were you looking at this and you're like, no, this needs some sprinkle in here?
Yeah. So going back to the old man in the woods again, like that's as like a pinnacle play of mine. There's magic in the play. There's these things called forest pirates, and they're in the play, and they're like doing forest pirate stuff. um and for when I wrote that, it was like very natural. Like I was just like, oh yeah, like this is what the story needs. This is what it like. I'm just gonna put it in there. So I didn't really put much more thought into it than that, because it was like so clear that it needed, that's the story I was telling and that's how I wanted to tell it. But then when that play I showed it to like a well-known playwright, and that playwright was like, you should never put magic in your work because it discredits it. I just, he was really like, yeah, like don't do that. And I mean, as a young person who's, trying to get, or like, I'm, taking like a play that I'm really proud of to like get, it's like, that's not even a note, you know what I mean? Like, so that's also why I'm like, this is a first when I became a playwright play, because it's also like how to navigate bad notes, and how to keep going in spite of that. But it did actually make me like, it dampened the idea of putting magic. I was like, okay, so I'm not allowed to do that. And it was exacerbated because I went to a playwriting peer who also said something similar, who said, magic is just tricks, and getting to theater is the essence of truth. And so how can we believe something when you're tricking us? And so again, I was like, okay, I'll believe you because, I don't know, like you seem to be an authority, and I'm a young playwright who doesn't really know better. So it took me a while to get back into putting overt magic into my plays, because it's hard. Like when you get thoughts like that presented to you, and you're still figuring out your craft, and you're also starting to add this layer of like, how do I get produced into the mix, or like how do I write plays that are good, or will get attention. It's like all of these things that start to come at you too, that they don't really prepare you for or teach you in school. It becomes overwhelming. So it took me a while to get back into like, let me put magic into my work. And the next play, but I did. I was writing a play called The Mermaid's Parade, which is set on Coney Island, and I just knew I wanted mermaid in it. Like I wanted it to revolve around like an actual mermaid. And at first I was like actually resistant. I was like, no, they'll just talk about the mermaid, like we'll never see that a creature, like it'll just be like whatever. But then I was like, no, I'm gonna have to put this character in the play. And then by putting that character in the play, it allowed for like what were the moments of like what is mermaid magic to humans in this story. And that was something that I was like, wow, I haven't thought about magic in this way, or like adding this element to my pieces in a while. And so now whenever I do go into writing a story that has some element of magical realism, I like to write usually magical realism, so I still like the realism to be very real, but then heightened by this idea of like there is magic everywhere. So magic as metaphor or magic as like potential reality. It depends on what the story needs and what is being called for. But I try not to be afraid to like just do it and see what happens. Even in my play that I workshopped with Playwright Center Hurricanes, it's a very I wouldn't call it magical realism, but I would say that I was struggling with the ending and trying to figure out the ending, and it's not there yet. But I was like, wait, there's a moment, like a magical moment happens, and it's not like a nice magical moment, and it's not like a fairy magical moment, but it's like a larger than reality, only can happen in a theatrical space kind of moment. And I just tried to like allow myself to go there and like, see what happens. It'll be fine. It'll be great. But to at least follow that instinct.
What would you say to young Gina now? Young Gina gets these notes, don't use magic in your play. And why might you encourage magic, and how might you say it would be positive?
I mean, now whenever anybody asks me for any type of advice, I always caveat it with, and if it doesn't ring true to you, don't listen to me. Like that is like one of the things I tell anybody. I'm like, advice is great, and it's not like a be all end all. We're all just human people that are just telling us, and we're all individual artists, and we're just like telling you our best bets, or the things that work for us. And one of the paths of becoming an artist is to figure out what works best for you as an artist, and to take what works and leave the rest. And so I would tell Gina, like, this person's point of view is valid for his experience, and it is echoed by a great deal, many of people, and they are not your people. So find those people that love magic and understand the play before you just get rid of an element or never explore it again. Like, don't be afraid of not having the work done because of who you are. You'll find the people. So that's what I think I would tell young
Nice.
Gina.
Yeah, it's really good advice.
Yeah. You have me thinking about all of the rules that like I was told, that you're not like no animals, no kids, like no quick scene changes. Like there's it's like thinking very practical about it. And from jump, you're like told think about producibility, which means you're not actually learning the craft of playwriting. You're learning what to put on stage, like what's producible, not like thinking about what experience you want. So I'm happy you ignored people.
Exactly. Learning that skill was really good. So I think it's a skill that should be taught. Like, and again, not to discount anybody that you don't agree with, because it's interesting to like see into what that is, and that's been to see it. I'm like, that person has a very set way that he sees theater, and that is fine for him and is so boring for me. So, and that's a valuable thing to know, and that's it. So yeah.
So when you're adding magic to the script, or you're viewing a show that utilizes magic, what does it add? Like what is the thing that you can do with it? How does it enhance the play that you're writing or that you're experiencing?
I think that magic, in the way that I like to view it the most, is adds like this element. It just heightens reality. It heightens like this idea that like why in our real lives, like perhaps we can't have magic, like perhaps like it doesn't sadly exist, but like getting to watch it in a play and watch characters grapple with it is such, it's like a cathartic thing without even needing a catharsis, if that makes sense. um One of my favorite plays that hasn't gotten a production yet, but I hope that it does, is by Matt Barbeau, Princess Clara of Loisida. And that is a play where a brother and a sister have a father who is in a catatonic state. So the brother is taking care of the sister, and he tells the story to the sister about how she was actually like, she's from a fairy kingdom. And throughout the course of the play, the question is like, is his telling the story making the magic happen, or is she actually like a fairy from this kingdom? And it's all like underlined by this need for escapism, because their life is so small in comparison to like that kind of adventure. And I just find it's like the power of storytelling, because it's like, can we create things just by telling them, speaking them into existence? It's, what if you were a fairy from a world that's not this world? And it's like, you're able to access that pain of like, this person is catatonic, and what that does to his children. So I think like that is my favorite way magic exists in plays, and like what it does, and what I lean forward more, I think, when it's there.
Sometimes magic is spectacle in a play, or some really, complicated acrobatics and, manipulations of the stage and the set and all that stuff. For folks who are thinking about bringing magic to their own plays, maybe for the first time, I sometimes hear that they believe their responsibility is to sort of solve the magic for the designers, or the theater or whatever. Can you talk about the responsibility of the playwright when it comes to magic, and then what isn't your responsibility?
I believe in, leaving clues versus instructions in our stage directions. So I do think that one of the reasons I love the form of theater is that it's going to be different in the hands of different designers. So I don't want to particularly like dictate everything in that. I want an interpretation, because I want the designer's artistry to be able to like be put into the fabric of whatever this production is going to be. For me, workshopping a play with magic helps me understand what needs to be clear and what can still be a suggestion. And so get only through like getting to see like how wildly off an interpretation might be, or like how very lost a designer might be, it helps me understand like, okay, I have to like actually be clearer here. But I do start with murkier and then get clearer, while still allowing for interpretation to exist, because I think that's important to me. I think like, and I think it's different per playwright and per play. So again, wouldn't want to like give a blanket statement to playwrights and responsibility, but I think it's a combination of like, how much do you want to give a designer to spark their imagination regarding your play, and what's important to you as a playwright to make sure is actually super clear, so that there isn't a weird interpretation or an interpretation that winds up just not being in line with what your vision is. Because, again, we all, magic, just the word, makes us all think of something different. So it's important to hold that balance and that truth in anything, I would say, like you're writing. But I do think something I had to learn was to learn not to be a control freak about my stage directions, or I learned the more I can take things out, the more I can see like what the play is on its own, and that was really important for me. And so I just always encourage people to like what happens if you don't put in like direction in your stage directions? Like, what if it becomes more stage suggestions instead? Yeah. So I think that's how I will answer that question.
That's great.
I mean, theater is a collaborative art form, so you could be super like I've seen those stage directions where it's like, yep, the actor's foot needs to hit this mark at this time, and you're like, whoa, I really have to think about there are a lot. You are very particular, you know exactly how you want this, right? But you just never know that somebody else might have this different vision that also does exactly what you want it to do. It heightens your intentions and the experience that you're trying to create for the audience. So I'm wondering how you kind of approach that collaboration when you actually have designers. What are the conversations you have? And also what advice, if somebody else is using magic, how you kind of talk about that and make sure that we're all in this, have the same vision as we're moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for collaborative designer, so I think it's always important to like hear from the designer like where they're starting from with it and what their interpretation of the play is. I think like that gives you a great sense of like how far we're on the same page versus off the same page. And I think any great designer, which I've only worked with great designers, like they're not going to get upset when you as a playwright tell them, oh, actually I was thinking this rather than what you've come up with here. I think obviously like have these conversations early on in a process, not like during tech week. That would be probably messier because all that work is done. But at the very beginning, a designer is bringing you something where the conversation will be like how far on is this, like how far, yes, we're all in agreement, versus like there's still a gap that needs to be filled. And I think again, like when you're dealing with something as large and murky and metaphorical as magic, those conversations are vital to have to make sure that we are all on the same page. Because even like with the Winter's Tale, like the way that statue comes back to life, like that could be interpreted in so many different ways. We have to know, like, is it like, what is the magic there? Like the conversations behind the stage that isn't happening in front of the audience, that is happening like with the director, the actor, and then enhanced by the design of like, what is that moment actually that we can then present to be interpreted by an audience, but at least we all are on the same page about it. I think just like not being afraid, not going in with like an iron fist into the conversation. So not going in to be like, this is why you're wrong before you hear anything, because it's also going to tell you like where you need to maybe make something clearer in the script. If it's very off base, if it really is like, wait, this isn't my vision at all. Like you completely missed it. It's probably you didn't make it clear in the script maybe. But yeah, just to not be afraid to like listen and be surprised, and then to share what your intent actually might be or is. I think just going in like that is the best way to go into any collaborative process. But I've always been surprised in the best ways whenever I've seen interpretations of my work. I've never really been like, that's wrong. I've really always been like, wow, this is amazing. And then those moments where it's like, that's not what I meant. It's usually me being like, okay, I should make this clearer in the script, actually. This does need a moment of clarity here.
Do you have any like specific don'ts in that collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so don't, how do I say it without making double negatives? Like, don't not listen. um, I guess that's just don't jump to a conclusion, because maybe when the presentation starts, it feels like the designer is like really, and the designer is really off base. Like, don't say like, don't stop them. Listen to what it is, because and listen, and at the end always ask, why did you choose that? Because again, you're just trying to understand that. And an answer, a collaborative answer might be in that answer. Just let a designer tell you like what the thought process is. Don't panic. Oh, that's it. Don't panic. Like, don't just be like, oh my God, it's wrong. Even if that's how you feel inside. There's so many moments where that's happened to me, even like with directors, where I'll be like, that's wrong, but then let it play out. Oh wait, that's what's happening. It's just not the way my brain works. We're getting to a better, got it. Just don't panic. And don't let someone tell you that you're wrong. So it's those two things, where don't panic, like let the person say the whole thing. And then after that, if it's wrong, if they're not on the right track, don't let anybody in that room tell you that you're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is another thing of being a playwright, where sometimes we are disempowered even in the room, because there's so many more people than the playwright. And even though everybody's there for the play, sometimes the playwright can be pushed really low in our own process. And just don't know that you are the power and it is your play. And it's also like harder to get a production than as a playwright. Like, it's harder to get that one play produced than a director might have, being able to get to the next gig of directing something else, or an actor being able to act in something else. This might be like your one chance to see a play in production. And so you, like, just have that power and get to see that. That's my advice.
We didn't prep you with this one ahead of time, so take your time. But I wonder if you have any plays that you would want to recommend people see if they're interested in seeing magic in plays that shows up in a way that you really love, or that shows up in different kinds of ways.
Well, I guess it's like there's plays that it's that line of like, well, what's magic and what's like horror, you know, and but I think those are hand in hand kind of things. And so I'm thinking of some of those right now. And also I need to, Playwrights, how they say their last names. Oh my gosh. But I would recommend, there's a playwright named Ashley Lauren Rogers who writes great body horror play, has written a great body horror play called Oddity that I would say requires magic, as well as her play Chasing the Ghost. Francesca Pazniaukis wrote The Wild Boar of Chernobyl, which I feel like is very like, I need to see that play on stage somewhere. I also might be too scared to see it, but I want to see it. Oh, you know what? I saw a play called Rust by Nancy Garcia Loza, and although it's a rooted in reality play, it's also a memory play, which I feel like I think memory plays are just beautiful and beautifully magical. And there's a character named Soy who is representing the playwright, and it is one of the most stunning like pieces of memory and magic combined. And there is like there's magic in there too. I just think that's such a I would very much recommend that play wildly. Those are the ones that come to mind. I'm gonna stay with that.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
I hope I got that one Playwright's name right.
Plays for people to read and see if they're not too scared.
Yeah, it's funny because I really like movies now, horror movies. I feel like good about, but I'm scared to see a horror play because I feel like it would make my anxiety higher because the feeling of being trapped, I feel like, is heightened. Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, if they do that magic right.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Either trapped for a good or bad reason, I guess. This is unwatchable.
That's also a possibility. All right. Well, we've come to what is known as my favorite part of the show. And my favorite question is, where today for you does theater begin?
I think today theater begins with joy and all its complications. But yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, where I feel like my work is there's a lot of tragedy in it. And I think like the joy is there too. And I just want it more heightened because I truly believe you can't have either without the other. So making sure that there's that joy in there.
Yeah. So true. Well, theater begins for me today when a parent really sees their kiddo and tells them to follow their dreams. I love that.
Yeah. I really resonated with me again is like mentors telling you not to do something on stage. Because I just keep thinking about, like, I was told don't put kids on stage. And I was like, but I've seen kids on stage. And they're like, those are exceptions. And I was like, oh, I don't get to be an exception. Okay. And I feel like if I wasn't told that, I would have stepped in a TYA writing years ago, like no, decades ago. So it feels, so that resonated with me. So today, theater begins when you trust your instincts on what you want to explore and feel brave enough to question and ignore notes that are not true to you in your writing.
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, that's the moral of the story today. Tell your kids, see your kids and tell them they have a talent and to go follow their dreams.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Gina. This was such a lovely conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me. What a great conversation to start my whole year with. So thank you.
More magic. Let's all bring more magic to the world and joy.
Join us for our next episode on March 27th. Let us know on Spotify where theater begins for you, and feel free to send your questions for future episodes to the link in the bio.
Thanks for listening to Playwrights Center's Theater Begins Here.